Welcome to another episode of the Into the Wilderness podcast. We have a very special guest today from Denmark, and the podcast will be in two parts.
We thought this was going to be like any other podcast, but once we got talking, we soon found ourselves at more than 2 hours, and that is the reason why this will be brought to you in two separate episodes. We discuss all manner of things. It's hard to know really where to start. We talk about rifle shooting, bow shooting, Bambi gets a mention. We delve deep into the ethics of hunting, and we also ask Ricky Gervais to hit us in the face. This podcast is brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. Welcome, everybody, to our latest installment of our Into the Wilderness podcast. This week, we've got a slightly different format for everybody. We've only got one guest joining us online over from Denmark. My brother is also in the studio with me as usual, but this time he's going to be taking part in some of the questioning. I have to admit that I've really been looking forward to doing this interview ever since I knew it was going ahead a couple of weeks ago. We've got David Carsten Peterson joining us, who is a very interesting character who I met some weeks, maybe months back now, actually over in Denmark on a trip that we were both on. And we're going to be talking about some films that he's made, as well as a television series that he has ongoing in Denmark. So, David, if we just start off just to let everybody know, what do you do on your sort of day-to-day life?
Actually, I try to make a living out of telling people how wonderful and exciting and important it is that we as hunters are allowed to do what we do, and that we are how we're responsible for the environment around us, and that creates a very non-typical day-to-day job where sometimes I'm spending a couple of days in the forest. Sometimes I'm sitting at meetings with different people and organizations, and other times I'm writing articles and making movies. So it's pretty much everything that has to do with hunting. I have my hands in it at some point or some way or the other.
Now, we're going to talk about one of your films, Heritage, which I suppose probably really, if anybody watches it, gives people a good idea of how you got to where you are. But just in a couple of minutes, just explain how you got to where you are today and what influenced you to that point.
I grew up with hunting. I think hunting has always been a part of who I am. It's a very strong family tradition. I started hunting with my dad I think he brought me when I was 3. And I actually remember some of the first hunts sitting next to my dad and him shooting roebucks running across the road. So yeah, I was scarred from an early age. And then growing up like that with all my cousins and all my and my parents and my sister and brother hunting, it's hard not to get that under your skin. And it's always been, whatever I did growing up, hunting was always something that you could go back to. It's a thing that I shared with my father when he wasn't working. Then we would go hunting and really spend some time together. So it's very much a way of, for me, it's a way of connecting with my family, but it's also a way of creating some sense in modern society. And I kind of decided when I finished my studies that I wanted to actually contribute to saving this fantastic thing that we have, because it kind of dawned on me that if everybody leans back and just says, okay, well, I like doing this, but I'm not going to participate in the fight to keep it or to better it, then it can be gone quite fast. And in that period of time when I started out, hunting wasn't very fashionable. It wasn't something that you did not see pictures of hunters in fashion magazines, and you did not see trophies on the wall in big fashionable shops. So it was a little bit against the stream, but now it's definitely turned the other way around. Especially in Denmark, hunting has become extremely popular, and also very accepted. So it's interesting to have been a part of that transition from being something that was outside of society and something now that's more accepted.
Yeah, I know. When I first met you, I think we were sitting around a fire the one night, and we were having a very similar discussion to this. And it amazed me just how much what you were saying, and I was just listening, echoed exactly my thoughts. And I am very much of the opinion that, you know, we do have a fight on our hands, and like you have just said, if I can echo that again, we can't sit back and enjoy doing what we've been doing and doing what we're doing for the greater good of management and wildlife without telling everybody what we're doing. And I've said this in previous podcasts actually, but I think that we have definitely been guilty of that in the past of just getting on with it without expressing and letting everybody know just what a good job we're doing.
Yeah, there used to be this thing in the 80s and early 90s with hunters in Denmark and most of Europe actually, where we were a little bit like, if nobody talks about it, then we're probably safe. And the problem is that in modern media, if you don't make the noise, somebody else will. And I think from a hunter's perspective, we've been very, very good at what we're actually doing outside of society, what we're doing with the game and management side. But the whole cultural side, we haven't focused on that, and that's where you can say, well, I'm not going to say the other side, but people who are against hunting or people who have other ideas of how deer should be managed and what we should do, they're very, very good at working on emotional levels and cultural levels. And if you want to win that battle, you have to participate in it where it's actually being fought. That's why I'm a big believer in using Facebook and using social media very aggressively to say, well, this is who we are. This is what we do. We don't hide anything. You can't just say that hunters are like this, because this is what we do. This is what it looks like, and then you can base your opinions on facts instead of rumors. Because I think most people, actually, especially most Europeans, when you introduce them to hunting in the right way and you kind of let them into our world and show them what actually happens and how we use the meat and all that stuff, most people can understand it and they accept it, especially if you say, well, where did your steak come from? Do you know what the cow you're eating right now, do you know what it looked like when it died? It freaks out quite a lot of people when you start asking questions like that.
Yeah, no, you're so right there, and it's you know what, it's actually a game that I play from time to time, depending on what kind of mood I'm in. I was sitting around a table with somebody, which in my other life and my other job, he sits quite a bit above me, but I get on very well with him, and we were talking about one thing and the other, and he's very much, wouldn't say he's an anti-hunter, but he has no concept of the countryside. He basically spends his life in the city. And he was asking me, you know, how do you not feel bad? How can you kill something and eat it? Or, you know, does it not bother you? And I said to him, well, I got a simple example for you. We were eating lunch, and he had his mince and tatties on his plate. And I said, well, you're currently eating a cow right now. And I spent about 30 seconds explaining to him what the life of a cow is like from the point where it's going to the abattoir to being put on his plate. And then I explained to him what wild meat looks like and painted a similar picture, but obviously at the opposite end of wild game and venison. And I said, which would you prefer? And he couldn't actually finish his food, and he had to go and put it in the bin because he and a lot of people don't ever really think about the process that animals go through to end up on your plate.
But we touched on this on another podcast about how the importance of it's our responsibility as hunters and that to educate people in this fact, because otherwise, like David said, a lot of people, they just gather their information online, and and a lot of it's not actually based on much fact. Some of the stuff that that's easily accessible online, and the education is really important on teaching people where their food comes from.
Yeah, it's really. I think it's really important that we as hunters kind of get with the program on that side, because the cultural war is actually that's what it's about. It's not about management. It has nothing to do with biology. It's nothing to do with numbers of game. It has something to do with a view on why we don't feel guilty about killing stuff. And that is when you look at the antis, or when you look at the discourse of a lot of the criticism, it basically all boils down to the problem, thou shalt not kill. And if you do, you should feel guilty about it. And then it's easier to feel guilty, to kind of push that guilt away and put the meat in the bin if you don't actually see the animal. So the more you distance yourself from the animal, the easier it is to forget that it's actually an animal. The sad part about that is that I have a serious problem eating meat from industrially produced meat, because once you get your head around how that cow actually lives, and then you get your head around how your deer actually lives, it's very hard to live with that fact that the cow you're eating right now is being raised in horrible conditions sometimes. And I try to kind of turn it around when people say, well, how can you, don't you feel bad about it? And say, no, but I don't feel bad about it. I take responsibility for it. I know where my food comes from, and I'm proud of that animal, and I try to honor it by eating as much as possible. When you say that this guy, he ends up throwing out the meat from the cow, that's just it. Actually, that really shows how deep the double standards go. Because once he finds out that he remembers, oh, this was actually a breathing thing as well, he distances himself from it by throwing it out.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest disrespect you can show an animal that died to put food on your plate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I always try and explain to people is that when I'm hunting, we've actually my brother and I have just finished making the first film of our series, and we explained it there, is that I take a massive amount of enjoyment from hunting and the whole process that goes into that from start to finish. I don't take any pleasure out of the killing of the animal, but that is the end act of hunting. And like you've just explained, it is all part of the process of putting meat on the table, and what we were doing was part of a greater management plan, as always it should be. But trying to explain to non-hunters that you can enjoy what you're doing, but you don't, you're not gleeful of the fact that you've killed someone. There's a massive amount of respect for the animal that has essentially given its life so that you and I and my brother and everybody else can eat.
Yeah, and you have a responsibility towards that animal to use it as much as possible and to make sure that death is not in vain. And it's, I've had this, we've all had this talk a million times with people at dinner parties, and I've also had it a few times with very militant vegans, which is also, that's also very fun. And I do respect that sometimes some people will say, okay, I can't live with the fact that something has to die for me to live. So that means I won't eat meat. And I'm fine with that, but you can also turn that around and saying, well, guys, you do know that a lot of animals and a lot of natural areas disappear because of the production of your food. Everything from palm oil, if you have products with palm oil in them from Sumatra, that's a huge problem. That's basically killing orangutans right now. And so everything you do has an impact. You can't live your life as humans. We can't live our lives without having an impact on our environment. But as hunters, we actually have a unique opportunity to make that impact as small as possible, but also as positive as possible, because we were all raised that death is something negative. It's very much a cultural thing. It's a philosophical thing. It's based on our on religion. It's totally ingrained in our society that death is not a good thing. But everything dies all the time. Animals die in the forest every day. So the question is, how can we turn that thing that's very much a part of life, how can we turn that into something positive where an animal just it doesn't disappear? When people ask me, why do you put the heads on the walls? Why do you have trophies on your walls? I have most of my trophies from the stuff I shoot in Denmark. I have that in my kitchen, because then I can look up on the wall when I'm cooking this thing. And when people ask me, what are we having? I'm said, that guy. And I think that's it does sound a little bit morbid, but it's also it's a way of keeping this animal alive in memory. If a red stag, if it dies on the mountain and nobody sees it, then that thing is gone. If you don't tell the story about this magnificent stag that was in its prime and got taken at the exactly right time, if you tell that story, then that animal lives on. And it's the same thing about my connection with my grandfather. When I tell stories about my grandfather is still around. And it's funny that the more I talk about him, the more I remember about him. Mm-hmm. And the more you kind of want his memory not just to fade away. And it's written on all his trophies. When you look at all the bucks he shot, his life is connected to the animals that he took while he was hunting. So it's kind of this whole meat and trophy thing. There's a big discussion amongst hunters sometimes. It's especially on Facebook that people go, oh, "Are you a meat hunter or are you a trophy hunter?" And I usually tell people that I consider myself 100% a trophy hunter, because for me a trophy is a story. A trophy hunt is not the same thing that you run around with your measuring tape and you have to shoot the biggest thing around. For me, it's about the pursuit of stories that makes your life worth living, and the connection you have with these animals. I think a beautiful trophy could be the skin from a female deer that you shot with your girlfriend, or that your girlfriend shot, or that you have a connection with. So it's not about size, it's about history and stories and remembering these animals. And I haven't seen any butchers who have put the heads of all the cows they've slaughtered up on the wall. I've never seen that.
I think you'd need a very big butcher shop.
You probably do.
There's a huge amount that you said there that, I can absolutely echo. There's a couple of things I just want to sort of pull back on, and eventually we'll get to your grandfather, because that ties in very nicely to the film that you've made, Heritage. When you were talking about non-meat eaters and expressing the fact to them that, do you know what has potentially died, and the land management changes that have to take over areas that might have otherwise been used for, or not being used, might have been a natural resource for orangutans or whatever else it is. I just wanted to bring up the point that everybody has blood on their hands, even if they don't realize it. I think the difference is that with hunters, or as hunters, and that sort of way of thinking, is that we're taking responsibility for the blood that's on our hands, and we're okay with that, and we've accepted it, and we've embraced it as part of life. Whether it's someone having to go and shoot rabbits on a crop because that crop is being damaged, and that crop will then go into potentially a vegan diet that animals have died for in order for them to eat it, or it be for some cosmetics that require certain lands to be used for things other than what the natural habitat could be. Everybody has blood on their hands in some shape or form. It might just not be as intrinsically connected as the one-to-one person to meet.
I mean, it goes all the way from like you said, a rabbit that could be potentially on some land that they need to shoot, all the way to small mammals, mice, all the way to insects, which, I mean, you can't deny if you're producing a crop or whatever, yeah, you might get natural pesticides and all these kind of things. Something is going to die so that you can eat, regardless if you're a vegan or not. An insect will die.
Yeah. The hypocrisy there, I always find quite amusing, because they're very quick to stand back and say, we are not guilty, but you, as a hunter, you're guilty.
Yes, it all boils down again. It's that whole guilt complex. And the guilt complex being that somebody else is guiltier than I am. Somebody else can be blamed for something. I actually don't understand. I don't understand the incentive to hate hunters so much. Like, what is it in the great scheme of things? If you set your mind, if you actually look at the facts of what we do and how we do it, when we do it right. What is it that you hate so much? What did we actually do to you? I think the problem that many people have, it all boils down to the fact that when you look at that animal, you see a beautiful animal that your instinct doesn't tell you to kill it. That's the anti-hunting incentive. But when as a hunter, when you see the animal, when I see a roe deer, my first instinct is not to kill the deer. But in the back of my mind, I know that the land and the way the whole thing is set up, if I want to manage this right, then this animal has to die at some point. It will die. I can't forget that fact. So the question is, am I going to take responsibility for this life? Or am I just going to leave it to chance and let the animal die possibly a lot slower and a lot less comfortable than what I can do? It's again, I think you have to be a hunter, and I think you also have to have been a hunter for maybe quite some time to start understanding the love that many hunters have for animals, and all the emotions that goes into especially management of deer. I'm personally, I think roe deer are some of the cutest animals on the face of the planet, and I'm starting to have a little bit of a problem shooting roe deer in my own forest, because I spend so much time looking at these things and checking them on cameras and register them and following them. And then when it finally comes to actually shooting them, you start being a little bit like, I could get maybe one more year. It's only like, okay, this one is standing exactly where it should be. There's no chance that this is not going to be the right shot. Okay, yes, you've had it. We're going to take you out.
You need to stop. You need to stop naming your roe deer. That's the problem.
Yeah, no, I didn't name them. No, I think that's. I don't think we should. You name your pets. Animals aren't pets.
But no, I mean, a lot of people, that sort of connection that you've just described, and this is going to take us into your film heritage, I think, that sort of connection that you've described is a very difficult thing to express across the people who haven't had that, that deep. I can't even quite put it into words, but you know what I'm talking about. When you spend so long in a place and you're surrounded by everything that's there, everything that's natural, everything that's wild, when you're in those wild places, you basically become at one with it. And the forest or the hill, if it's hill ground, or the bush if you're out in Africa, it almost accepts you. And it's very hard to feel that connection if you're not a hunter.
Yeah, it becomes. I always feel very much at home in the bush. I have a good friend who's a PhD in South Africa, who taught me quite a lot, also from a philosophical point of view. And he says when he walks into the bush, that's his church. That's like walking into his church. And I feel the same way, but I have this very homely feeling. I'm never scared in the forest. I don't feel pushed out. You can feel disconnected when you're a city, or if you're in one area where you kind of feel a bad vibe. but I don't get that feeling in the forest. And the more you relax in any natural habitat, the more you get that grounded connection with everything around you. And it's actually gotten to a point for me where I have one problem with hunting that I'm not very proud of. It's actually quite a major problem for me. I really don't like getting up early in the morning.
I think I'll join you on that one as well.
Yeah, that is actually my only problem. So I've started to snooze quite a lot when I'm out. If I can sneak off half an hour on the side when I'm in the forest, I will lay down under a tree in the rain and just sleep for half an hour and get up and keep hunting. And you can only do that if you are so relaxed that you're not going to freak out that a fox is going to come and bite your ear. People are scared of really strange things, and having that feeling that you don't go outside. You open the door to your home when you go into the forest. It's very much a mental thing, and it's something that the more you spend time with your animals and with the trees and just on the ground, I think the more you develop that connection. But I think you're right that the problem is a lot of people are extremely disconnected from their own natural reality.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on, David.
Yeah, I've experienced. I had a great experience of that difference between connection and disconnection. Is that we had some guests from Singapore who visited us in our forest, and I took them out driving around. It's a beautiful Danish forest. There's absolutely nothing dangerous there, but they really enjoyed it. They really learned from it, but they were also a little bit scared about it because. Are there any dangerous animals? Are there any snakes? Can this plant be poisonous? Of course, it's because from an upbringing in a environment where there are actually poisonous animals, you start getting a little bit worried. But seeing my home with completely foreign eyes really made me realize that. When we if we go to Borneo or Sumatra, when you visit a tribe in Borneo, they have the same connection with their surroundings as I have with my surroundings at home. That hunters who are very passionate about their area or who really knows the area and feel at home in it, they have a connection, a mental connection, and you can. And we probably always had that as hunters going back in history, and it's only that the disconnection steps in when people spend less and less and less time, not just outside, not running or biking or whatever, not action sports, but just sitting next to a tree. I think a lot of people would benefit extremely by sitting in a tree stand for 6 hours without an iPhone.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because a lot of people don't just stand or sit and listen and smell and watch. My brother and I, we've just come back from Skye.
Very evident this week of exactly what you've just been talking about right there.
Yeah, we were sitting up on a mountainside. I think you saw what I sent you one or two of the pictures, so you could see where we were, right up in the granite tops of the Kulins, and we're spying for deer, for stags. And we're watching, and some of the places around there are quite popular for walkers, because there's quite a lot of Munros around there. People like going up to the tops. And we were watching the odd person walk up the hillside and then up into the sort of steep mountainside. And we watched these two walkers merrily going along the walker's path, walk right underneath a stag that was holding about half a dozen hinds, and they didn't even see it. It wasn't until they were a few hundred meters they walked within about 70 meters of it. It wasn't until they walked a few hundred meters past and he got up and he gave a roar that they looked back at what was going on. And then another good example of that was when we were dragging the stag that we had shot off the hill a couple of days later. We dragged this stag right past a guy. I mean, what was he, Daryl, 50 meters away?
I would say less than 50 meters.
Less than 50 meters away. And he had his headphones in and he was taking pictures of the mountainside. And he left that hill without even knowing that a stag had been dragged within 50 meters of him.
Didn't even see us the whole time. Not one glance.
Yeah, I have similar experiences when I'm in the forest with my bow, because it's so quiet and it's so thick. So when you have people walking their dogs or just running in the forest, the way of that they have no idea you're there, and to watch how people actually act in the forest when they don't know that anybody's looking. I'm sometimes a little bit amazed that they don't just stop and listen and smell and sit down and chill out and just take the whole experience into them. And also running with earphones in the forest, I don't understand that, because you have so many sounds that you're actually missing a huge part of the picture if you don't get the sounds. But yeah, people are different. The thing about, you said, with looking up or looking down and not actually seeing your surroundings, I think for me the mentality of being a hunter, you don't actually have to hunt. It's more of mentality of connection, that you want that connection, that you have to see, and a sense of adventure, is that you have to see what's on the next horizon. You have to just crawl up on the top of the mountain just to see if there's a stag. You might not have your rifle, but it would be really cool. And it's just this burning desire to climb that tree. And you can see it when you're in the city and you walk down pedestrian streets. Whether people, they look down on their shoes or on their phones, or if they look up on the roofs, on the buildings and their surroundings. And my bet is that you will find a lot more hunters looking up, because you start when you start being aware of your surroundings and finding out that the little details everywhere are actually quite exciting. Then it's very hard to throw that, I think. And that's also what I want to inspire people to, that hunting is not, you're not just a hunter when you put your camo jacket on and you take your rifle out of the car. That's not when you become the hunter. A hunter is a mental state, and you don't become a hunter by getting a hunting license, and you don't have to have a hunting license to have that mental state. It's something that we're starting to see more and more in Denmark, and and Scandinavia, that this has become more of a mental thing than it's just the physical act of going out and shooting something and eating it.
I mean, you're right, though. It is the little things. It's the little things that are important. I mean, you should have seen my brother when he saw a frog. We saw this frog bounce off the stone into the grass. You would think it was Christmas.
I get very excited over insects and amphibious animals, and that. I love things like that. That's what gets me really excited. So
we're hunting this massive, majestic animal on the hillside, on the stag, and I think he was more excited over the frog than he was about seeing the deer. But that's exactly, I think, what you're saying. I mean, it's all about that, and it's about being at one with your surroundings and really appreciating every little part of the wilderness, the managed wilderness, if you like, that makes it what it is, and it's seeing it in the first place.
Yeah. I'm just picturing the frog right now.
Well, you'll get to see him when we release the
series.
You'll get to see the frog.
Now I'm going to move on.
I'm looking forward to the frog.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on, actually, because we've been talking and talking. It's been a great chat, but I haven't even got to your films yet, and this was the first thing that was on my list. So I think we're going to talk about heritage, which is really, I think, for anybody to watch it, I said this earlier, will tell you who you are if you watch it. But can you just tell me, why did you make it? For those people who haven't seen it, what's it about, and why should they go and watch it?
I've wanted to make a movie that showed who we are as hunters from the inside. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while. I think we have a tendency, or we've had a tendency, that when we make hunting movies, a lot of it evolves around the kill. And as we've talked about, in my opinion, the kill is not the exciting part. The kill is just a very necessary part, because you can't really eat an animal that's not dead. And I wanted to show the inside of the hunters who spend so much time and energy on finding these animals, but also on that the whole background. Why do we end up being who we are? And it's something that I talked a lot with the director of the movie, Joachim, about. That how do we show the soul and not just a shot? And it's always easy just to take yourself as an example, because there's so many. I think there's so many stories that I haven't told yet about. That we hadn't told yet about who we are on that level. We wanted to. I wanted to do the heritage movie about the bow hunt in my grandfather's forest, because it's something that I've always wanted to. Actually, I always wanted to shoot a buck in his forest with a bow. It's something that we've talked about since we were tiny kids. That's the first forest I hunted in when I was 3 with my dad, and me and my cousins, we used to play around with bows. We're not allowed to hunt with bows in Denmark until we are 16 and we get our hunting license, but we're allowed to run around the forest and shooting sticks and stumps and stuff. And it's kind of been like the holy grail of my family. Or like just my cousins and me, and I'm the only one of my cousins who actually got the bow hunting license, and my grandfather never did. I know that he wanted to, and he used to shoot a longbow, and my grandmother also shot a longbow, and I know that they would have wanted this to happen for their grandchildren. So it was kind of trying to fulfill something that it was trying to fulfill a story that hadn't been told yet. I have all these stories about my grandfather who did all these things, but he never shot a roebuck with a bow, and he would have wanted to do that. So it was kind of doing it for him. That was the initial idea. And then while we were doing the movie, it kind of dawned on me that this movie was more than an unfolding of my relation with my grandfather and with my forest. We inherited the forest, and it's my dad who runs it now, and getting to explore that connection, my connection with my father, my connection with my grandfather, that emotional level. It actually brought quite a lot of things out, and there's going to be some scenes in the movie that you see where it's quite emotional, and it was quite emotional. We had the whole movie is shot during a week where we hunted 7 to 9 hours every day. It was actually quite brutal, because while we were doing it, we had that whole mental side. When you have a camera on you all the time, and you kind of you open up your heart to all these emotions that comes in, and the potential of failure. What does this mean to you? How does this hit you? And I was hit quite hard, but also because it really dawned on me that this forest, my grandfather and grandmother, they're still alive in the forest. They're alive in the trees. They're alive in the memory of what they did. And it's kind of my responsibility now, and my father's responsibility, and my future kids, to keep them alive by keeping their trees alive, by keeping the animals alive, by preserving what they created, but also doing it in their spirit, which is making it better. it's not conservation for me is not about bottling up this thing. We shouldn't put a fence around the forest and to say, okay, all the trees that my grandfather planted, they are sacred and they should never be cut down. A forest is a living thing that keeps evolving, and we are as much as part of this forest as the trees and the rodents and the foxes. And there's a lot of these things that kind of that dawned on me while we were making the movie. So when we finally get the prize, it was quite an emotional experience, but it was also a little bit sad because when you want something so bad and you really, really work for it, then all of a sudden it's there and the bug is on the ground and you succeeded, but you didn't. That's only a tiny part of the story. The bug on the ground and the dead animal is a little point in that whole line of events. And it took me a little while just to get my head around that this was not the end of that story. It was just the beginning of the next story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my brother and I, we've taken a lot of inspiration in terms of the look and feel of your film, and I encourage anybody, even though it's not in English, there's English subtitles. I encourage anybody to watch it if you really want to kind of a feel.
It really is a beautifully shot piece of film work, as well as the story is really nice.
Yeah,
and
that's all Joachim. We had an extremely good photographer on that film. He's very, very talented.
And the one thing, as Byron just said, this particular film, Heritage, isn't actually in English. But if anything, I would say it adds, for me personally, it actually adds to the film, it not being English. I mean, it's got English subtitles, but for me, it adds to the film.
Yeah, it definitely shouldn't put anybody off watching it just because it's not in English.
No,
I'd encourage anybody to watch it. And I think it, like Daryl said, it added that certain character. Almost your English is probably better than ours, but the fact that you did it in your native tongue actually added a lot of character to it.
We had a discussion about it because originally we wanted to do it in English, but the problem was that since this was not a movie about an animal getting shot, but a movie about a hunter opening up his heart and letting people inside, it wouldn't make sense to do it in another language than the instinctive language of this person. So if it would have been a Kenyan, we would have done it in Swahili, because the emotion that comes out in your native language will always be that much stronger because you don't have to think about your words. And it's also like Danes, we were all raised with TV shows that were subtitled. So we are totally used to, if you want to watch a movie in another language, it's not a problem. You just read the subtitles. So we thought that for once, then everybody else should be suffering the same problems that we have.
No, I thought it worked really well.
Thank you very much. It's I'm very proud about it. I think it and we had some amazing feedback. It's also when you put out a movie like that, where what happens on screen is what actually happens. Then you're always a little bit worried about reaction. You know, the roar of the Facebook community. But we've had some very emotional reactions, and some people who really they reconnected with some memories about their own family. And we've had people. I had one guy who wrote me and said that he was always raised hunting, but he never got his license, and he never really got around to doing it. And then he watched the movie, and now he decided that he wanted to take up hunting because he missed that connection. And he was 40. So he'd gone through his whole life, and he said he was very thankful that this movie had reconnected him with something that he was missing. And that's quite something when you make something and it actually works, and you actually touch people and change their minds.
That just shows you the power of not only the message that you're telling, because I mean the people will watch this. We'll put a link in the podcast for people to watch the Heritage. But I mean, it's a very emotional story about your grandfather and your father, but also very emotional, and you go into everything that we've just discussed in the last half an hour about hunting and yourself.
Yeah, it's if you again, it's a very honest film. I don't with all the projects that I make, I have this principle that we don't lie. We don't. It's so easy when you make movies, when you make films, when you make television to put in the After Effects and play around with the camera angles and tell the story in a little bit of a different way than what might have happened in real life. But I think there's a very strong there's a very strong position in saying that, okay, what happens is what happens if we don't shoot an animal. That's the reality of hunting. This is who we are. And I do feel that, especially when you work in the field of telling hunting stories, you must never forget that it's actually real animals that we are in the pursuit of. It mustn't become a question of bagging a trophy for the sake of the movie.
Yeah.
The animal is still the animal. If you play tennis or play golf, knock yourself out. You can cheat all you want. But this is still, we're still taking a life, and that should be taken very seriously. I've had some very serious discussions about this with some TV producers once or twice, who said, but couldn't we? And what if we? And we can just. I said, no, it's not going to happen. And it's something that I'm quite proud of, because it means that when you look back on your life, when I'm at some point luckily reached the ripe age of 82, which my grandfather did, you can look back and say, okay, we did this honestly. The animals that we took, the lives that we took, they weren't taken in vain. All the animals on the wall, those are the real memories. Mm-hmm. And I think that in the hunting industry and the hunting world, where hunters like telling stories, and sometimes they also tell them to themselves, I think you cheat yourself a little bit if you don't do it with the utmost honesty.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And we're going to talk about your next film very shortly. After we got a couple of questions on Heritage, which I just want to go through. I think my brother's going to ask a few of them. But when we talk about your next film that you actually made before Heritage, I think it was in conjunction with ZEISS. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. When we talk about that, we'll maybe look a little bit further into other films that have been made in the last few years, and sort of your opinion of maybe the perception that we give the general public when these films go out there that are not made like the one that you've made. But we'll touch on that in a bit. Daryl, you've got a couple of questions actually on this film, which I think tie in nicely with what we've just been talking about.
Yeah. So basically, the first question, you'll notice in the film that you're actually shooting with a bow, which obviously in the UK we don't do any bow hunting in the UK. And we just wanted to know why bow hunting for you instead of a rifle?
Well, I'm also a rifle. I also hunt with a rifle and with shotguns as well. But the bow is the bow connects you with the animal in a very different way than the rifle. When I stalk with my rifle, at the time the hunt ends, when I pull the trigger and the animal goes down, that's actually where the bow hunt starts. If you see a buck 100 meters away with your bow, you don't even have a chance of shooting it. You have to get within 20 meters of it, which is pretty hard. And that challenge really it demands a lot of you. You can't. you can't just sit back and relax and just take an easy shot. There are no easy shots with a bow. It's all, you get in so close to the animals that their fight or flight zone, you are well within that. Also, I've bow hunted musk ox in Greenland, and bow hunting a very, very big animal that has absolutely no fear or respect of you, and it's sitting there considering whether it should beat you or just walk off. It's a very humbling experience, and there's quite a lot of so on one side, bow hunting demands a lot of the hunter, and it forces you to learn everything. There's no cheating. Either you do it right, or it's just not going to work. I've had 14 roebucks this season that I could have shot with a rifle easily, and I shot one with a bow. And I haven't had a single time where I was sad that I hadn't brought the rifle, because it would have been an easy trophy on the wall. But I've always been happy that I brought the bow, because almost getting it with the bow is often as good as the feeling is often as good as shooting something with the rifle. It extends the experience. The story gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I've also in Denmark you have to take a separate test with each bow type you want to hunt with, and I hunt with a compound bow, which is an extremely precise weapon. Very, very precise, very much like shooting a rifle. I can recommend it to everybody, except it's highly addictive. But I've also shot the longbow, a modern version of a longbow in modern composite materials, but it's extremely fast and very, very efficient. But I couldn't qualify for the test. I took the test and didn't pass, which means I can only hunt with my compound bow. And I'm quite proud of that, because we have, of course, I'm frustrated that I couldn't pass, but I'm very happy that the rules regarding bow hunting in Denmark are very, very strict, and that if you are a bow hunter, you have to practice. We have to take this test every 5 years. They're going to take the license away from you.
Well, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know it before reading bits and pieces that you'd put online about the regulations with regard to bow hunting. Like my brother says, we can't do it at all here. Now, before we go on to the next question on this, I just want to, just because we're talking about the subject, and it's particularly pertinent because of bow hunting, or I think it was a crossbow that was used with Cecil the Lion. We're talking a couple of months back now. So my question to you on bow hunting, I have shot a bow quite a bit in Africa actually, but I've never hunted with a bow because I don't have the skill for it. But bow hunting compared to killing an animal with a rifle bullet, what is the difference? In terms of the ethics behind it. Obviously, as hunters, our goal is as quick and efficient and as clean a kill as possible. Does that not really mean that we should use a rifle all the time? I don't know, just putting that out there.
Actually, like the bow is an extremely efficient weapon. Humans have been killing stuff with bows for 10,000 years. It's a very, very efficient weapon, especially the modern compound bow is extraordinarily precise. A good group with a compound bow is within like a 2 to 5 inch group on 25 to 30 meters that's good, but it's not extraordinary. Like you very often you don't shoot on the same target, because then you do Robin Hood, you shoot through your own arrows. It happens quite a lot. So it's a very, very precise weapon. It's also the blades that we use. You seen the movie where I sit and
we saw that.
Yeah, sharpen all the blades. That's not just a Rambo thing. It's not something that we do for the show. This is something that we do every time we go out. You sharpen your blades so they are sharp as razors, and you test it on your arm. So it's very, very efficient. When you see an animal, when you take an animal with the bow, the bleeding out is quite fast. What some people freak out a little bit about is that if you see a bow kill, the animal doesn't run very far, and you often see it die. With the rifle, you usually shoot it from about maybe 100 meters, maybe 150. So when it goes down, you don't see the actual animal dying. You just see some legs up in the air. But it's a very close experience. It's very organic. You can actually see the arrow pass through the animal and listen, and you hear the sound of the arrow passing through the lungs. That's a very organic feeling. It's also very, very strong. It's very, with a rifle, especially at distances, you sometimes forget you're actually putting a bullet through a body. So when you bow hunt and when you take an animal with your bow, it's a very, very emotional experience. Talking about the technical side, there's this huge misconception that it takes longer for the animal to die from an arrow than it does from a rifle bullet, and that it's more stressful. And it's actually quite often that when you shoot an animal with the bow, when it's bleeding out, it doesn't run very far because it's not shocked. It doesn't feel it very much. Those very, very sharp blades, they just cut straight through and open quite a massive hole. And then the interesting thing around it is when the animal goes down, if there are other animals around, they'll just keep standing around because everything else, the boom didn't happen. Like even if you have a suppressor on, you still have a sound that disrupts nature. You have an unnatural sound. With the bow, you just have thwack. And I've seen rows standing around a buck going like, "Why are you lying down?" And not understanding what happened. I had with the musk ox. There was another one standing next to it, and it had no clue. It had absolutely no clue what happened. But if we shot it with a rifle, then the whole thing would have been disrupted. So again, it's the connection. You are much more a part of your environment with the bow, and you have to be more a part of the environment because it's not going to work out. If you're too disconnected, then you can't get that close, especially when you spot and stalk. Then you really get a feeling of your surroundings, and you really get a feeling of the ground. That if you break that one twig, then everything's just going to get busted.
Yeah, it's always fascinated me. I was encouraged by my cousin in South Africa, and one day I hope to be good enough to be able to do it. But I've always intended to skip the compound step and go to recurve. But as you've very carefully explained earlier, by the test that you guys have to do, you really do need a huge amount of skill to be able to shoot with one of those.
Yeah,
and it's not something to be taken lightly. You don't just put arrows in the air and hope for the best. It's not like that.
Yeah, I think actually I'm quite saddened that there are so many European countries that doesn't allow bow hunting, and especially Britain with such a long and strong history of the longbow. That we actually gave you guys. The Vikings brought the longbows to Britain. I'm just saying. And you have this strong tradition and history, and I think a lot of the main reason why bow hunting isn't allowed is because the hunters don't believe in it. A lot of hunters who are just rifle hunters and who haven't seen a modern bow and how it works still thinks that it's basically just a pointed stick that you shoot at something and hope that you hit. It's really not like that, and I think it's very important that we as bow hunters keep a very high standard of training, and that we aim to be as good as we can possibly be, even more than with a rifle, because we are a minority, and I would like us to become a majority.
Yeah, I suppose the margin for error is also smaller than with a rifle. Would I be right in saying that?
Actually, but the area that you hit is the same, and also that you get so close that it's not, if you do your margin of error on a 200 or a 300 meter shot on a roebuck, that's not very big. Like if you jerk the trigger, that can really turn out badly with a rifle. Mm-hmm. But when you're within 20 meters of a roe or a bigger animal, then the target that you have to hit is actually quite big. Of course, like it's hunting. Sometimes things don't go as planned. But with the modern equipment, then even less than perfect shot is still lethal. And the arrow, they do break bones. It's quite efficient. So I really hope that we can get some potential British bow hunters to pick up the bow. There are actually quite a few British bow hunters who hunt overseas or who hunt in in Africa or Hungary. And you're very welcome to come and visit in Denmark.
I think I might have to take you up on that offer at some point. But I kind of, in a slightly lesser way, I can grasp what you're talking about, the getting in close and everything extra that maybe gives you over, standing back at your sort of 100-meter point with a rifle. Because this season, at the start of this season, I shot only with open sights on my rifle. And for the same kind of reasons that you've been talking about, but it meant that I had to bring my 100 down to 50 or less.
Yep.
Not because it's not possible to do it at 100, but I didn't feel like I was comfortable enough back there doing it. So I can totally get there. But Daryl, I think you've got another good question, and I'm intrigued to hear what the answer to this is.
Yeah. So basically,
I'm just
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure that I really don't want to be elitist about bow hunting. I think that people should do what they enjoy doing, but I totally agree with you that a lot of rifle hunters would benefit from challenging themselves a little bit more. And there's no reason why you can't sneak up on a roebuck about 20 meters with a rifle. I've done it several times, and it's a really good challenge. So I'm not saying that bow hunters are better hunters. I'm just saying that challenge yourself as much as possible and get a bow.
And get a bow.
So just one more kind of question about your movie heritage, and obviously all the way through you talk about your grandfather and your father. What would you say is the best piece of advice your father or your grandfather gave you about life and about hunting and managing the land?
About life and hunting or managing my land, or all three?
Well, you take your pick. Yeah, probably all three. Or
yeah.
I think it's my father is still alive, and he's probably going to hear this at some point. But I think the best advice or the best principle they raised us with is to live your life honestly. Manage your property with honesty. Hunt with honesty. If you say that you manage your deer herd, or if you view yourself as a conservationist, talking about it is not going to help. You actually have to do it. If you want to manage a deer population, you have to get your head around how many do you actually have, how many heads, how many fawns, how many bucks, what do they eat, when do they eat it, can you increase the number, can you decrease the number. It's all about knowledge. It's about studying these things and really getting your head around the skills that goes into being a hunter and being a manager. And it's all about honesty. It doesn't work to on one hand say that hunters we're conservationists and we do all this for the benefit of course ourselves, but also of nature, and then on the other hand you do stuff that's illegal, or you shoot endangered animals, or what's called the best example is we always get accused of shooting or hunters always get accused of shooting birds of prey, and
which is very topical in the UK.
Yeah, and it's also topical in Denmark because the ornithologists all try to. They keep saying, but you do this, you do this, you do this, and for me, it's like you can't. How I was raised is that you can't call yourself a hunter if you break the law. Then you're a poacher, and I have a very special place for poachers in my opinion. When you've done anti-poaching in Africa, you kind of develop a strong anti.
Yes, I can relate to that directly.
Yeah, and very hands-on as well. And I'm very much against wildlife crimes. And shooting a predator bird is a wildlife crime, and hunters don't do wildlife crimes. So again, it takes me into that a hunter, in my opinion, is the custodian of the land. You're the custodian of your forest, of your area. It's your responsibility to learn as much as you possibly can, but also to teach as much as you possibly can. It's like the custodian in a museum. If you ask them about a painting, they said, well, I don't know and I don't care. That's never going to happen. Same thing with a hunter. You have to learn more about your environment, your area, than just what you can shoot and how far away it is. Then it's you have a responsibility. Honesty and responsibility. I think that's one of the main things. And then I think on the last one is that they've also taught me that you only have, like, everything is final. Everything dies in the end. At some point, your granddad is not going to be around. At some point, the trees are being cut down, and then something else has to grow up. Having that understanding that life ends, and that's okay.
And embracing it.
Yeah, and embracing it. It really gives you. It really gives you a sense of urgency that if you want to do something, you have to do it. You can't just sit around and go and, I wish I did this and this and this. Oh, if I just chose a job where I could do what I love doing. That's not going to work. Like, either you do it or you don't. What's also nice about learning about your own finality is that it also teaches you that life, it might end, but it also continues in the next life, being your kids or being your grandkids or being your nephew, and you can extend the story of a person into other people's lives. Yeah. We just brought my nephew, who's 4, on his first hunt in my granddad's forest this weekend, or the last weekend. And seeing this tiny, tiny little guy walking with his mother in his hand, and he's crawling over these trees, and he's really struggling. And I did the exact same thing in the exact same spot. And my sister did the exact same thing in the exact same spot. And at some point, he's already learned a lot about my grandfather, but he's going to learn more and more. And my grandfather's vision and the memory of him is going to live on in this little kid's life. And hopefully Eddie, which is his name, will have the same experience and say, okay, my uncle taught me this and this and this, and now I'm going to teach that to my nephew. And he's going to have the joy of seeing this little kid seeing the forest for the first time. Like, imagine all the stuff that we've been through our whole life. Imagine seeing that again.
For the first time.
I
almost wish I could. And
I'm actually quite envious of new hunters that they get to shoot their first animal. Again. Because you're like, that was extraordinary. It's like
all of those things that we did for the first time. I can't even. If I had to bottle up everything that I've done already, and I want to do so much more into a single emotion, I think it would just explode. But what you say, I wholeheartedly agree with, and I think what it boils down to is that everything that we do is partly because for our own enjoyment, but it's mostly for the continuation and for the next generation, and that we need to make sure that whatever we do, whether that be in hunting and management or life in general, that we're leaving it in a way that is better, or at least the same, but hopefully better for those people who come after us.
Yeah, and what I like about it is it's actually possible. Like, in these days, we talk about everything is going bad and crisis and the environment is crashing and total catastrophes around the corner. When you're a hunter and when you manage your land, you can actually make it better quite easily, especially if nothing's been done to it. If you manage it for 200-300 years, it's pretty tweaked already. But when you start out in maybe a normal farmland or somewhere, and you really want to create something, you say, okay, we want to create the best area for deer or the best area for ducks, and we want to do it as natural as possible. It doesn't take very long. And the evidence of what you've done shows itself quite fast. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I would love to inspire more people to spend more time with the land management, spend more time Also, just with it doesn't have to be your hunting ground. It could also just be your garden. To get more insects, plant more funny stuff, plant stuff that the birds will attract insects, so the birds will come, and when the birds come, then the predator birds come, and then you have that whole ecosystem. You can do that on the
start to finish.
Yeah, and you can do it on the top of your house in the middle of the city. Again, it's the hunter's mentality. You don't actually have to kill something in order to enjoy it. It's creating life.
Yeah, no, I think you know what, and that is exactly the key. It's about sustaining life. Hunting is actually about sustaining life, and it's a very difficult thing for people who are not hunters to get their head around. Now, there's one thing I just want to touch on very quickly before we hear a clip from the other film, which we're going to talk about briefly, that you made in British Columbia. And I don't know, probably 10 minutes ago now, you were talking about how anything that is being done illegally is not hunting, it's poaching. And I just wanted to reiterate the fact, and I always make a point of trying to express this to people, is that in the media, what we hear and what we see written down, there's this massive blurring between hunting and poaching. You see the word hunting used when there has been a big poaching occurrence where something has been maybe shot illegally with guns, if it's, you know, half a herd of elephant that have been gunned down with AKs. Hunting will be somewhere in the text there. That's not hunting, that's poaching. And that is something that we should, whenever we hear that mistake, as hunters, we should be writing letters, we should be on the phone, and we should make sure that the media do not blur that line. We have the right to call ourselves hunters because of everything that we do. Those people who are breaking the law do not have the right to call themselves hunters. No,
I totally agree. We've had a talk about it quite a few times in the circles of hunters that I frequent, and my usual example is to say that, well, there's also a difference between sex and rape. Sex is something that hopefully is fun for everybody. And
I never thought we'd get to that on this.
And a sustainable activity. Whereas rape is the destruction of something beautiful. And again, when you watch Heritage and when you watch all the stuff that I make, it's love stories. Because I love what I do, and I love hunting, and I love the animals, and I love that life. So I think that emotional bond translate quite well between, like, you have hunting and you have sex and you have kids and you have family and you have all these, like, very, very base, deep down emotions, your connection with your parents.
It's very raw as well. It's the basis of life. It's very raw. It's almost the basis of life.
Yeah, it's very raw. It's something. It's very honest. It's very it's very real. It's also something that everybody can connect to. Whereas the criminal activity of destroying something like that, in my personal opinion, I think we should punish poachers a lot harder than we do. In Sweden, they are really, really hard on poaching, and I applaud that. I think it's the right way, especially, like, sometimes stuff happens that wasn't intentional, and we have to leave some space for the gray areas. But when you know that this guy did something, like if you shoot an elephant with an AK-47, you know you're doing something wrong. If you shoot an eagle out of the sky, you know what you're doing, and that should be punished. And it's just like unconsensual sex, that should also be punished. Like, you should treat your partner with respect. So yeah, again, it all evolves around these very raw emotions that is controlled by respect and honesty and a love of what you have, an appreciation of what you have.
I think we've got a snippet here from the other film that you made in British Columbia, which I think probably expresses, well, a snippet that expresses your kind of your feelings. So we're going to play that now, and then we'll talk about the film briefly.
Life's great adventure is different for everybody. For me, it's about doing what you love, and what I love to do is go hunting. As a hunter, I live to travel the world and see new places. I want to go where I've never been, see the other side of the horizon, and learn as much from nature as it's willing to show me.
And just as you were getting into that, we're going to have to stop it there. Join us in 2 weeks' time when you get to hear the second hour of this podcast. I'm sure that you will all agree with me that it's been absolutely fascinating so far. And do make sure that you check out all the details so that you can go and look at the 2 films we've mentioned already.
Now, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And remember, if you are a subscriber on iTunes, you will get it a day early.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports.